Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going on an adventure. Well, not exactly packing our bags kind of venture, but we're diving deep into something you probably use every single day. The US dollar. You might think you know it, the dollar I mean. But trust me, there's a whole world beyond those presidents on the bills.
You're absolutely right. The dollar's influence stretches far beyond U.S. borders. It's a story full of twists and turns. To understand its global reach, we need to go back to its roots.
Okay, let's rewind the clock. Where do we even begin? Where does the dollar story start?
Well, the first chapter unfolds in the early 20th century. Imagine 1914, just a year after the Federal Reserve was established. The first Federal Reserve note rolls off the printing press. A $10 bill.
A $10 bill. Not the iconic George Washington.
You got it. Believe it or not, the $1 bill with George Washington as we know it today, it didn't appear until 1963. But before we get there, we need to talk about a pivotal moment. You know, the one that propelled the dollar onto the world stage. The Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944.
The Bretton Woods Agreement. Okay, for those of us who might not be familiar, what was so significant about this agreement?
Okay, so imagine a world recovering from a devastating war. Everyone seeking stability and a way to rebuild. The Bretton Woods Agreement, signed by the United States and its allies, aimed to create a new international monetary system. And at the heart of it all was the U.S. dollar, crowned as the world's reserve currency.
A reserve currency? What does that even mean?
Think of it as the gold standard of the global economy. You know, the currency held in significant quantities by central banks and other major financial institutions worldwide, used for international transactions, and often seen as a safe haven during those times of economic uncertainty.
So after World War II, the US dollar became the go-to currency for countries around the world.
Got it.
But the Bretton Woods Agreement, it didn't last forever, did it?
It did not, no. The Bretton Woods system ended in 1973. But here's the thing. Even after its demise, the dollar retained its dominance. It's still the most traded currency globally and a cornerstone of the international financial system.
Hold on a second. Before we go any further, if you're finding this deep dive as captivating as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support truly means the world to us and helps us bring you these fascinating insights.
Absolutely. We love sharing these stories, and we are thrilled to have you along for the ride.
Okay, back to the dollar's global journey.
Mm.
I bet most people don't even realize just how many countries and territories use the US dollar as their official currency.
You are right about that. The number might surprise you. 11 foreign countries and territories have adopted the U.S. dollar as their official currency.
Wow, that's incredible. So I'm guessing these aren't just random far-flung places, right?
Not at all. We're talking about places like Ecuador, El Salvador, and even the British Virgin Islands, all using the same greenbacks we use right here in the U.S.
The British Virgin Islands using US dollars. See, now that's something I wouldn't have guessed.
So what drives these countries and territories to adopt the U.S. dollar as their own? Well, there's a mix of reasons. Fascinating, really. In some cases, it's about stability, the U.S. dollar. It's generally considered a stable currency, right? Which can be very attractive to countries with, well, let's say, more volatile economies. It can be a way to tame inflation and attract foreign investment.
So for some countries, it's like hitching their economic wagon to the perceived stability of the US dollar.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the other side of that coin. Are there any potential downsides to this?
You're right to wonder about that. There are definitely downsides. It's, like you said, putting all your eggs in one basket. You gain that stability, but you sacrifice some independence. You become vulnerable to fluctuations in the U.S. economy, and you lose control over your own monetary policy.
Makes sense. So it's a trade-off. But it's not always just about economics, though, right? I mean, there are other factors at play.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's more about historical ties. Political relationships even. Like, take the British Virgin Islands, for example. They've had strong economic and political links with the U.S. for decades. So using the dollar, well, it makes sense for them, practically and symbolically.
It's fascinating how currency can reflect these deeper connections. More than just a means of exchange, right? It's a symbol of shared history, intertwined economies.
Exactly. And then you've got tourism. For destinations that heavily rely on U.S. tourists, using the dollar just simplifies transactions and can really be a boon for the local economy.
Makes things easier for everyone. It's like a universal language,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to, well, commerce. So we've got stability, historical ties, tourism, all these things driving the adoption of the dollar. You know, our source material actually has a table listing all the countries and territories that officially use the US dollar. It's pretty impressive to see the geographic reach.
It is. And the dollar's influence, it doesn't stop there. It pops up in places where it's not even the official currency. circulating alongside local currencies.
Oh, yeah. You mean those places where you can just pay with dollars even though it's not technically their money? I've definitely seen that travel.
Precisely. Quasi-official use, we call it. Think Panama, Belize, even Cambodia. You'll find U.S. dollars being used in everyday transactions.
Wow. So you could be exploring those ancient temples in Cambodia and paying for souvenirs with US dollars. Really highlights the dollar's global acceptance. But what makes these countries embrace the dollar in this unofficial way?
Trust. A big part of it is trust. In regions with a history of economic instability, people often see the US dollar as a stable store of value, a way to safeguard their savings from, those fluctuating local currencies.
Right. If you're in a place where your own currency could lose value quickly, it's natural to want something, well, more stable.
Yeah.
Seek refuge in something else.
Exactly, a safety net, even if it's not officially recognized. And sometimes historical factors play a role. The old city of Jerusalem is a really interesting example. You'll find U.S. dollars being used there, reflecting those complex political and economic dynamics of the region.
It's amazing how a single currency can have such a presence in so many different cultures and economies. It makes you realize money's more than just a physical object. It's a symbol of power, trust, even interconnectedness.
You got it. And as we move further into the digital age, it's fascinating to think about how the dollar's role might evolve, right?
That's a great point. We've talked about the dollar's past and its presence around the globe. But what about its future? Cryptocurrencies, digital payment systems? How do you see the dollar navigating this new landscape?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Hard to predict with certainty. But one thing's for sure, the world of finance is transforming. And this rise of digital currencies, well, it could potentially challenge the dollar's dominance in the years to come.
It's like we're at the edge of a new frontier. Will the dollar adapt and contain its spot at the top, or are we going to see a shift in the global currency landscape?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it's definitely a conversation we need to be having. The dollar story is far from over, that's for sure. And the next chapters, I have a feeling they'll be full of those unexpected twists and turns.
Before we get too lost in the future, though, I want to hear from our listeners. Have you ever traveled to a place where the US dollar was surprisingly prevalent? Or maybe you've got thoughts on the dollar's future in this digital world.
Yeah, we love hearing from our audience. Share your stories and insights with us on social media. Your perspectives make these conversations so much richer.
Absolutely. Real-life experiences and diverse viewpoints, that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. Speaking of, we've covered a lot of ground today, huh?
We have, from the very origins of the dollar to its, well, let's say unexpected global reach. We've explored the factors that have shaped its journey and considered the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
Yeah, it really is remarkable to think about it, how a single currency, has woven itself into the global tapestry. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to that table we mentioned earlier, the one listing all those countries and territories officially using the US dollar. I think it'd be helpful to highlight a few examples, especially those with those unique connections to the U.S.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's zoom in on a few key players, starting with the British Virgin Islands. We talked about them earlier. This British overseas territory, they're in the Caribbean, right? They adopted the U.S. dollar way back in 1959.
And if I'm remembering correctly, that decision was influenced by their close ties to the U.S. Virgin Islands, another, well, U.S. territory just a stone's throw away.
You got it. Proximity, interconnectedness between the two, well, it naturally fostered using a common currency. Win-win, really, especially for the British Virgin Islands tourism industry.
Yeah, I can imagine. Using the dollar probably simplifies things for all those visitors from the U.S. and those other dollarized economies. It's seamless. For tourists, I mean. And a boost for local businesses as well. Now, what about Ecuador? Adopting the U.S. dollar always seemed like a pretty bold move.
Ecuador's story is definitely unique. They jumped headfirst into dollarization in 2000, following a severe financial crisis. Drastic measure for sure, but it aimed to stabilize their currency, put a stop to that runaway inflation.
So they basically said, see you later, to their own currency, the sucre, and went all in on the U.S. dollar.
Exactly. Controversial, sure, at the time, but it's brought some stability to their economy. Not a perfect solution, of course. There are definitely ongoing debates about the long-term impacts.
Fascinating case study, though. In the complexities of dollarization, now El Salvador, they adopted the U.S. dollar as their official currency in 2001.
Yep. Similar path to Ecuador. Embrace the dollar to fight inflation, promote economic stability, testament to the dollar's strength, I think. Reliability, even when there's economic turmoil.
So both Ecuador and El Salvador, they saw dollarization as a way to Well, navigate tough economic times,
Mhm.
anchor their economies to a more stable currency.
Exactly. Desire for stability, a belief in that, well, enduring power of the dollar.
We've come a long way.
Mhm.
From the dollar's humble beginnings to its, well, global reign, from its origins back in the early 20th century to its influence in so many corners of the world, it's been a pretty incredible deep dive.
It really has. And the dollar story, it's not over yet. As we look ahead, with digital currencies, the global economy constantly shifting, well, the next chapters are bound to be full of surprises.
It's a future worth thinking about,
Mm.
and one we'll definitely keep exploring in future episodes. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the US dollar. Hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to share these insights with our audience. So curious, so engaged.
And before we sign off, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more fascinating deep dives. We'll be back soon with another captivating topic, ready to, well, unravel its mysteries. Until then, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.